Good morning, good afternoon, Year 5. I hope you're okay. It is Monday. I hope you've had a wonderful weekend. It was lovely weather, so I hope you've been outside and you've been enjoying it. I think we've decided this week we're going to do a video every other day for reading, okay? So we'll do Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and then if we do the same next week, it will just perfectly marry up with the end of our book and also the end of term. So, Chapter 6. It took some time for it to sink in. We sat together, the four of us, in the hay barn. We could talk there, Mother said, without any danger of Gran overhearing. Beside me, Father was sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, picking at the nail of his forefinger with his thumbnail. It was left to Mother to explain it all. To be honest, it didn't much matter to me why it happened. I mean, it didn't make any difference, did it? We were selling the farm, and that was all there was to it. I suppose Mother was doing her best to make it hurt less. We've done all we can, she said. Your father's worked himself to the bone, but it was always an uphill struggle on this land. It never was the best farm in the world, but we knew that when we took it on, didn't we, dear? Father stared straight on ahead of him and said nothing. Mother went on. The land's steep and a lot of it faces north, and it's wet land too. Still, we've managed to make ends meet over the years, but we've had a bit of bad luck these past 2 or 3 years. Poor lambing for the past couple of years, a lot of singles, and then we had that scour. The price of pigs has fallen, and you remember that there was that blight in the potatoes last year. We hardly lifted any good ones at all. We were hoping for a good corn harvest this year, but it wasn't good enough. The sums just weren't adding up, and that's what farming's all about in the end. The sums have got to add up. Of course, if we own the farm, we could sell a bit of land, and we'd be all right again, but we don't. As you know, it belongs to Mr. Watts. I don't like Mr. Watts, said Will. Like him or not, Will, he's the landlord, said Mother, and we've got to pay him his rent. We've had to borrow money from the bank to pay the rent for 3 years now, and Father said they won't let us do it again. So there's nothing else for it. The only way to pay the bank back is to sell up, but we'll need to sell everything. Not everything, said Will. Everything, Father snapped, standing up suddenly. Cows, sheep, bullocks, machinery, and Sally. She'll have to go too. But how are we going to farm without any animals? Without any tractors? I asked. We aren't going to farm, said Father. Not anymore. Or anyway, we've still got the house, haven't we? Said Will. Father turned on us. Don't you understand, Will? We've got to go. We've to leave this house as well. It belongs to the landlord, to Mr. Watts, same as the farm does. If we can't pay rent, we can't. He'll want us out. We're 6 months overdue with the rent already, and the bank won't let us have any more money. Now do you understand? You mean we can't even live here anymore? I said, and as I said it, I understood the last whole terrible truth. So that had been the reason for Father's black moods, for his long, deep silences of recent weeks. That was why Mother and Father were shouting at each other in the kitchen that evening. We mustn't say a word about it to Gran, said Mother. She mustn't know yet, not until she's completely better. We've somehow got to tell her so it doesn't upset her too much. But where are we going to live? Said Will, his eyes full of tears. Where are we going to go? We've always lived here. Over 20 years I've farmed this land, Will, said Father. We'll just have to find somewhere else, that's all. Another farm? Said Will, brightening a bit. Father shook his head. You need money to run a farm, and I'm not borrowing it. What we make on the sale of the animals and machinery will just about pay off the bank, and I'm never borrowing another penny, not as long as I live. I told Auntie Ellie this might happen, said Mother, and she said right away we could go and live with her, just till we sorted things out a bit. She's got plenty of room. Perhaps it will be a blessing after all. You can never tell, as Gran says, every cloud has a silver lining. I know, said Will, who was beginning to cry openly now, and there's a light at the end of every tunnel, and he rushed out of the hay barn. Father went after him. I think your father's more upset for Will than he is for himself, said Mother, standing up and brushing the hay off her skirt. How long before we've got to go? I asked. The solicitor says we've got to be out by Michaelmas. That's less than 2 months away. Michaelmas, I've heard that before. There'll be a lot to do, Bessie dear, and perhaps just as well. Come on, young lady. She took my hand and we went outside into the sunlight. What will Father do? I asked. He'll find a job somewhere, I suppose, said Mother. And what if he can't? Then I'll find a job, said Mother. What if you can't find a job? What if, Mother said. We'll manage. You'll see. We always have, haven't we? Let's just ride out this storm, Bess, before we face the next one. Hadn't someone else talked to me of storms ahead? Is this what Walter had meant? This is what he was warning me about, but how could he possibly have known this was going to happen? Why did he have to talk in riddles? Not a word to Gran now, remember, was the last thing Mother said to me before we went back into the house. Within a day or two, Gran was sent off to stay with Auntie Ellie. It would be better that way, and safer, Mother said. Auntie Ellie would tell her gently when she felt the time was right. At school, it soon got around that the Throckmortons were being put off the farm, and everyone wanted to know where we were going and why. In the playground after lunch one day, Will had a fight with Simon Battle. It would be him. He picked fights with everyone. Simon Battle told Will that he'd heard Father had been drinking too much in the evenings at the Mighty Duck. It was really called the Black Swan, but everyone called it the Mucky Duck, when he should have been out farming, and that was why we were having to leave the farm. Will didn't care too much for that, and said so with his fists, leaving Simon Battle a bit bruised and battered. I was proud of my brother that day. Don't get me wrong, I don't like fighting, not normally. But in some ways life changed for the better, strange as that may seem. Everyone, except Simon Battle and one or two others, felt sorry for us. The teachers were all sweet as pie, so that Will got away with blue murder, and my pictures and poems were always put on the wall in the classroom. I even had one up in the front hall. They were all good, of course, but not that good. But this was small enough compensation for the misery facing us every afternoon when we got back home from school. You couldn't call it home, not anymore. The farm was full of strange people wandering around, scrutinising the cows and looking into the sheep's mouths. They inspected the machinery and clambered all over the barn. They peered down the drains and wells and sniffed at the hay, and they weren't only out on the farm, they were in the house as well. I came back from school one day and found a man in a Sherlock Holmes hat up in my bedroom, pushing his penknife into the windowsill. Just testing for dry rot, he said. Lots of it about in this house. No central heating, I see. Nothing much been done in this place for a few years, by the look of it. I felt like knocking his silly hat off. I never discovered who he was. I never knew who any of them were, except Mr. Watts. I recognised Mr. Watts, the landlord. You could hardly miss him. He had a face so purple and puffed up that I thought he might blow up one day and fly away, snorting like a balloon. Of course I'd seen him on the farm with Father from time to time. He used to come around a couple of times a year to inspect the farm gates and the ditches and hedges. In spite of everything, Father and he still seemed very friendly, and I could not understand that at all. After all, this is the man who was kicking us out of our home, and kicking Father off his farm. Well, I wasn't going to smile at him, nor have him give me one of his horrible humbugs he was always offering me. Will disliked him just as much, but the trouble was he loved humbugs, so he took all the humbugs he was offered. At least he never smiled at Mr. Watts, and he never said thank you. It was at nights I thought most about my friend Walter alone, in his cold, damp room up in the Tower of London, and I longed to have him with me again. Every night I read the book about him that I brought back from the library. There were a lot of long words I didn't understand, but I understood enough to know everything he told me was true. Walter Raleigh was never a traitor. They had taken everything away from him, and they hadn't given him a fair trial. I could quite understand why he wanted revenge. I was angry at him, though, angry that he'd left me when I needed him most. True, he had warned me of storms ahead, and now I knew perfectly well what he'd meant by that. But I wondered over and over again how he'd known about what would happen, and if he had known, then why hadn't he stayed to help me? I remembered every night his words of hope to me just before he left, and said them over and over to myself just before I went to sleep. I said them so often that I came to believe them absolutely. Storms always pass and give way to clear blue skies. Have faith that all will be well and will be so. Only believe the thing is, and it is. Believe it's not, and it's not. If my friend Walter said everything would be all right, then it would be. I never doubted it. And because of that, I can honestly say that those last few weeks on the farm were the happiest I can remember. I knew for sure that something would happen, perhaps to the last moment, so somehow we'd be able to stay on the farm. That's what I told Will too. Of course, he wanted to believe me, and I think in the end he did. He must have done, because we certainly did not mope, either of us. Every daylight hour when we weren't in school, we'd be out together on the farm, the two of us, no matter what the weather. It was as if Will wanted to make the most of every day, just in case the worst came to the worst, perhaps. For some reason, he wanted to be with me all of the time. And I liked that. Maybe it was because Father was so busy getting ready for the sale and packing up. Maybe he just didn't want to ever be on his own. I don't know, and I don't care, but whatever the reason, Will turned into a proper brother during those weeks. Or did I turn into a proper sister? Either way, we scarcely ever quarrelled, even though he did ask me time and time again about the letter and the bottle he'd found in my bedroom, each time probing deeper and deeper. I just told him it was a secret, and I couldn't tell him. Not yet. But that one day soon I would tell him everything. Each day he wondered if that day had come, and I had to put him off. We became such good friends that I was often tempted to tell him all about my friend Walter, but I didn't like breaking promises, and I still wasn't sure whether Will would believe me. We went fishing together almost every day, if the river wasn't too high, and he'd let me use his rod whenever I wanted. He taught me how to make a fly and how to tie it so that it didn't keep coming off, and what flies to use in what weather, and where the fish lie. We rowed out on Sally, both of us up, with me behind clinging on. We picked every blackberry on the farm that wasn't too green or too squashy to eat. We ate most of them ourselves and gave the rest to Sally and the pigs, and we came home black-mouthed and blue-lipped. We stripped the apple trees and went mushrooming every morning before breakfast. Not going to leave a thing for the next people, Will said. Saw the horrible Barrowbills looking over the farm this afternoon. Couldn't bear it if they moved in here. There won't be any next people, I said. We'll still be here. You see. You'll see. I hope you're right, he said. The sale's less than a week away now. 5 days. My faith in the Walters' words was becoming a little fragile now, so I prayed each night too, just for good measure. By the morning of the sale, I think I knew it was almost hopeless to go on believing that anything could stop it now, but I clung to the little faith I had left. You never know, I told myself. You never know. The whole farm had been invaded by lorries and Land Rovers and laughing farmers leaning on sticks, and it was difficult for Will and me to get away and be on our own. In the end, we found the haystack was the only place. I was sitting next to Will, high up on the haystack, looking down the yard where the auctioneers had set up a temporary sale ring. When the hammer fell for the first time, Father's favourite cow was sold. I understood the last of emptiness of Walter Rayleigh's comforting words. They'd been false words. Everything he'd said had sounded so good, so believable. I saw Mother and Father standing beside the auctioneer, and the fixed sadness on their faces brought tears of anger to my eyes. One by one the cows were driven in and sold, and after them the sheep and then the pigs. Everything was going. It was too late now. There's no hope left. My friend Walter had betrayed me. He'd lied to me, and I would tell him so. I'm going fishing, I said. All right, I'll see you down there, said Will, who had not taken his eyes off the ring below. I'll just wait to see Sally sold. I want to know who she goes to. I just hope those horrible Barrowbills don't get her, that's all. They've bought almost all the pigs, you know. I began to climb down the haystack. Bessie, Will called after me. I stopped and looked up at him. You told me it would never happen, he said, and it's happening, isn't it? I couldn't say anything. There was nothing to say. It's not your fault, I suppose, he said. Not anyone's fault. I left him sitting there. No one saw me as I went into the house and up into my room to fetch my things. As I crept past little Jim's room, I could hear Auntie Ellie singing to him while she changed his nappy. The tune was Three Blind Mice. Mucky pup, she sang. Who's Mucky Pup? Who's Mucky Pup? Lucky little Jim, I thought. He doesn't know what's going on. He'll never ever remember today. I emptied my piggy bank. If I included the £10 I got from Auntie Ellie last Christmas, I had almost £20 in all, just about enough to get me to London and back, I thought. It was quite easy to get to Exeter. I got a lift in one of the cattle trucks that had just finished loading in the farm lane. I told the driver some cock and bull story about visiting my gran in hospital. He seemed to believe me, and that's where he dropped me. It was a long walk from there down to the station, but I wasn't worried. I knew there were trains to London often enough. Be along in 10 minutes, said the man in the ticket office. Do you want a return? Yes. Are you on your own, are you? He examined me keenly through the glass. Bit young to be on your own, aren't you? I'm 13, I lied, keeping my eyes down as I counted out my money. You don't look it, he said. Well, I am, I said. I felt as if he was still suspicious after he gave me the ticket, so I walked as tall as I could and quickly as I could through the ticket barrier and towards the train. The train was crowded, but I managed to find a seat next to a lady with a silver white hair who smelt of cough sweets. Opposite me was an old man who slept almost all of the way to London with his mouth open. I was so fascinated by the repeated attempts of a large fly to look inside his mouth that the journey passed quickly enough. I'd been on the London Underground twice before, but never on my own, so I was soon lost. The Underground map was multicoloured maze to me, so I gave up and tried to ask someone. But there were so many people, and they all seemed in such a hurry to get wherever it was they were going, that it was difficult to stop anybody and ask them. In the end, I managed to ask a Chinese lady who didn't speak English very well, but she knew where Tower Hill Station was and pointed back in the direction I'd just come from. She even came with me to be sure I got on the right train. So I found myself, at last, late that afternoon, walking past the guards to the Beefeaters, past the Traitor's Gate, and up the hill towards the Tower Green and the Bloody Tower. Most people seemed to be coming out already, and there were no queues outside the Crown Jewels or the Bloody Tower. On Tower Green, 3 ravens fought noisily over the remains of a pork pie, and a Beefeater posed for a photograph surrounded by a party of children. I took the steps up to the Bloody Tower in twos, hoping to find myself alone. I prepared exactly what I would say to him. I wasn't going to mince words, I can tell you. He shouldn't have told me everything will work out just because you think it will. I'd tell him just what I thought of him. His room was packed with people on a guided tour. I did not recognise the language they were speaking. It wasn't French, I knew that much. All I knew is that the guide loved to talk. He spent 10 minutes rambling on, and it all ended when he gave himself a mock chop on the back of the head, and everyone roared with laughter. They took a few photographs, and then they were gone, and I was alone. I coughed 4 times. Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. I whispered, "Water! Water! Where are you?" Still nothing. I made for Rayleigh's Walk. At the far end there were a few people leaning out over the wall and calling out to friends below. But they were some way away, and so I coughed anyway, loudly and deliberately, 4 times. They turned and looked at me rather sharply, almost suspiciously, so I got out my handkerchief and continued my coughing fit, just to convince them. "I hear you, cousin. I hear you, cousin." I turned around. My friend Walter was standing by the doorway, his black cloak wrapped around him, and he walked towards me now, his arms outstretched to greet me. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 6, so we'll have to find out what happens in chapter 7 on Wednesday. Hope you're enjoying it, and I'll see you then. Bye!